So I realize I'm sure everybody has a lot of thoughts on these issues, but just trying to get through these questions. Mrs. Foley has the question, with days left before the semester start begins dwindling and the COVID cases and the deaths in Georgia skyrocketing, is there an aggressive plan to get these vital demands out there in a national spotlight, since that's the only thing that will affect rapid change within the USG system? I will help however I can, but we would be stronger together, which I think is a great point to raise here. So I guess would anybody like to jump in?
So I would say to that we have to be persistent, and whether a story kind of breaks and becomes a national story isn't entirely within our control, right? But as the cases continue to skyrocket, this is going to become a bigger and bigger issue. So we just have to be working tirelessly to make sure that we're basically giving ourselves chances to get that luck that we need and keep up with the action. So I know Alex has been involved with efforts to, organize calling campaigns to the Board of Regents. That's another thing we can do, is pressure the Board of Regents directly by calling into their offices and, making sure that our concerns are heard. So unfortunately, there's no silver bullet to make your story become a national story. And, if there was, then we might have a bit more luck. But, we just have to be persistent is how I would respond to that.
So actually just branching on this or jumping on this really quickly, an anonymous attendee actually has a great point that sort of adds to this. If GT insists that the only mechanism for public health is for students to take action, then what's to stop students from collectively refusing to attend face-to-face classes?
To my knowledge, nothing will stop you from, if you have a hybrid class, they cannot make you go to the touch points. From all the information I've seen, that will be the case, that you will not face a grade penalty if you refuse to go to the face-to-face touch points. If anyone else has conflicting information with that, I'd love to hear, because I don't want to tell people that, but I've heard it from multiple.
That's what I understand as well. And this has all been so confusing for us as much as for the students, for us faculty as much as the students, because there's been a sort of flood of information, and that flood of information appears to create greater clarity because it provides additional detail. But because there's so much of it, it's like just wading through this swamp of new and old knowledge. And so that's like it's a very boring part of the problem, but it is very much part of the problem. Like this sort of, there's so much information that it's also almost become misinformation. But students have much more control and much more power than any of the rest of us. And there's absolutely nothing stopping you, either individually or as a group and a collective, through action from kind of taking the reins and not attending those classes. The faculty have been pretty clearly instructed not to penalize students in those cases. Not that I think we would anyway.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in real quick. I don't know if you all have seen, but there were some things surfacing on social media about a leaked email from, I believe it was like the Scheller College of Business, and in those instructions, there was essentially the messaging to say, don't tell students up front that they don't have to attend the classes. We want them to be here in person, obviously for the money-making schemes that have already been mentioned. But it's very concerning, because I think to some extent, it has been done in a way that has been intentionally to mislead students. So that way there would be this sort of confusion about, do I have to attend? Do I not have to attend? And on top of that, the reason why that's so concerning is because for a lot of students, especially those who are out of state again and international, when you return to campus, that means you're then paying for housing, going back to the previous question, or it means that you're going to be living off campus. And so once you're there, you're pretty much stuck there because of those financial pieces of it, especially if you're off campus. So that to me is very concerning, that it hasn't been a very clear, transparent answer thus far that's saying, students, you don't have to attend classes in person. because they don't want us to do that. They want us to be there to have to pay for that stuff.
Yeah.
So that's what I'd add.
Okay, so from my perspective as a faculty member, I did see that posted email. I can't speak to its authenticity. I just don't know whether that, but I have not seen any sentiment like that from any of the I'm all over the place on campus, and I have not seen that sentiment anywhere. That sort of, we need to trick the students into being here kind of idea, for what it's worth. The other thing I'll say on that, in that regard, is that broadly speaking, the obstacles that we faced have been these sort of, to my mind, have been these sort of organizational political ones, or just political obstacles with the USG, or what I might generously describe as sort of bureaucratic incompetence. I do not believe there's a kind of conspiracy at work here, where the administration are colluding behind closed doors to flood the airwaves in order to dupe the students into coming back. I don't think that's what's happening. I think it's been extremely frustrating, and there's been an enormous lack of clarity. But it's let's not get too tinfoil hat about the whys of that.
And just to clarify, because I just want to make sure my point was clear, because I might have misspoke, but what I wanted to say was that email, so we actually did do a little bit of digging, at least on the SGA side today, just to figure out the veracity of that, whether or not that actually did come from a staff member. Our understanding is that email was actually sent out. And so that's what we were able to try and ascertain from folks that we spoke to in higher administration. I don't know if that was something that an individual sent on their own, or if that was something that someone higher up directed. But I guess my general concern with that is that the lack of clarity has been alarming. And so that's the thing that I was just trying to make clear.
Yeah, I think.
I want to jump in here just for a second. If I can, just really quickly, because I do want to say, while I appreciate Ian's point, right, I agree that I don't think people are colluding behind the scenes, like twirling their evil mustaches and things like that. Like I said, I was in town hall with the vice provost for undergraduate education today, and he said the exact same thing that email says, right, which is that we are not allowed to give a blanket policy that, hey, if you don't want to come to hybrid touch points, you don't have to come to hybrid touch points. He specifically told us we're not allowed to say that. Whatever the sort of intention of that is, I think part of the problem is that there's a lot like double speak and mixed messages that are getting thrown back and forth, and it's not fair for students. Like, that is the end of the story. It's frustrating for me as a faculty member, but it is absolutely unjust for students. And just to like close the loop on all of this, here's what I'll say. There's two things about not attending classes, right? There's the kind of moral stand you take for yourself, or in some cases it might even be a kind of safety stance that you take for yourself. I'm going to choose not to come back to campus because it's not safe for X, Y, or Z reason. And then there is the broader sort of organized action piece that you can mount together, where you say collectively, we as this body of students are not going to attend class because it is not safe. There's pros and cons to both of those approaches. I'm not going to tell you what to do or not do, because there's consequences and risks involved with either of them. But those are two different ways to think about this question of whether or not to attend class.
Right. I know a lot of great perspectives here, and at least I hope for the attendee that answers the question pretty well. Going on to James Ellis here. Would increased testing on campus take away from testing centers in the rest of Atlanta? Which I think that's an interesting question. Does anyone want to answer?
So I do not, I don't trust my my knowledge on this topic, but my understanding is that Georgia Tech is building out its own testing infrastructure.
Okay, I guess it's not a super complicated question there, unless anybody else has any knowledge here. Or
I mean, there's a limited number of tests, and they have to get sent to labs, and I don't exactly know how our plan is interacting with that system, but my understanding is that we're trying to build out our own infrastructure, and I would hope that that question or that problem is being addressed as a part of it. That's certainly something we could find out, though.
Okay. So I guess a somewhat morbid question here from Courtney. Do you know if there is any behind the scenes talk about the university's liability should somebody die? So hopefully this question doesn't come into play, but certainly something on people's minds.
They've been really reticent to say anything about what the contingency plans are should a community member, excuse me, I should say another community member, because we actually at Georgia Tech have already lost someone to coronavirus.
Oh, no.
We lost a police officer in the spring. That being said, I want students particularly, I want you to be careful and watch out, because when you come to campus, when you come back to class, they're going to ask to sign something that they call jackets protecting jackets, which is like they're treating it as some extra piece of the code of conduct or the student conduct sort of mechanism that they have for enforcing rules on campus. And I haven't seen it. I don't know what it will look like. However, one of the things we heard from the lawyer who works with the union is that what the schools will like to do is give you this huge info dump of information and make you sign things that you can't possibly have time to read and look over and take to a lawyer and get analyzed. And you may very well sign something that supposedly waives the university's liability, whether or not you realize it. So I don't necessarily know what to do to resist that at this point. But be aware that that is something that could happen. They may be asking you to sign things that are in some way trying to release them from liability.
Yeah, and just to I guess kind of speak in another capacity. So I've been doing just some research because of my internship on the Hill, and so another thing that's been proposed has been this sort of blanket corporate liability where corporate entities will not have the responsibility for employees who may test positive for coronavirus and catch the virus while at work. And so the thing that's crazy about that is, there are all these false fears that, oh my goodness, Georgia Tech will get so many lawsuits if we don't essentially indemnify ourselves or protect ourselves. And so what my thing is that the research that's currently out there shows that there has not been a wave of lawsuits around the country. I think it's been less than 50 when I last heard and was on a call. And so it's just interesting because that's the sort of fear that we're hearing about, but that can be alleviated if we actually make sure that the protocols are in place to minimize that risk, and certainly bringing people back is going to increase that risk. And so that's one thing that I would add to that point.
All right. Any other thoughts here before we move on? All right. So Kim Cobb is asking, we are focused on the physical health of community members, but how can we proactively prepare to address the mental health issues that might be particularly acute this fall? Which I think is definitely an interesting question to consider.
So I'll start, I suppose. I don't know of any specific statements administration has made about this or any specific plans that they have to expand, mental health care access during this pandemic. I do know that the state of mental health care at Georgia Tech was abysmal before this pandemic. And I suspect it will only get worse. So I think this is a hugely important issue that's kind of going unnoticed. And we should take it into account in our organizing and in our actions and in our statements.
All right. Any other thoughts before we move on?
I will say from a faculty perspective, particularly those of us who are Britain Fellows, who are in a sort of interesting position because we're contingent, and we were students not long ago as we were finishing our PhDs. In every meeting we've been in, we have tried to ask the question about mental health. What are we doing for students to support their mental health through this? And in every meeting, that question has somehow been avoided, not been the one that gets asked, not, we've run out of time and things like that. So I'm going to agree with Brett. Got to keep it at the forefront of the organizing, because clearly, like, we're not getting through yet, and we need to.
All right, definitely great responses here. So Jake Churchill is asking, how much autonomy do individual departments have within Georgia Tech? I believe the AE department has moved all classes online. Would it be effective to pressure different departments to move classes online? So I guess Dr. Bogost and Dr. Edwards, if either of you two would like to.
Yeah, this is a complicated question. I'm trying to decide how to approach an answer to it. So in some ways, like when you ask, just by posing the question, it gets kind of infected with this idea that autonomy is something that is sought out from above, which is related to the sort of illness or whatever I was referring to earlier. So, a school and a college are entities, structural entities that we have at this institution that were defined as autonomous ones, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't exist. We'd just be in this sort of murk with everyone else. And so by virtue of the fact that they have been organized as such, they have autonomy. Now, how they choose, and then there's a chair of a school and a dean who runs a college. And before this year, the choices that a school chair made, some of those the dean might be privy to, or the faculty, and others no one asked after. It was another chair might not have known about them. They just took place locally because that's sort of the unit, the smallest unit at which management happens. Now we're in this circumstance where everyone has started to look around and ask, well, what can I do? What can't I do? Rather than to interpret the kind of possibility space within the constraints that they've been given as authority, as their own authority, and even absent those constraints, to make decisions that are backed for good reason, whether that's moral, organizational, or has to do with professional or policies and other kinds of guidance. Like, for example, the AAUP that I mentioned a while back has produced a set of guidelines for faculty governance and operations under the COVID era. And one of those has to do with the autonomy of classrooms and faculty choice in those classrooms. So this is kind of like a long-winded way of saying that they should have quite a bit of autonomy. And because most students, not all, but most students are within a particular school, it may indeed be useful to think of one coalition that you want to build as being that of your fellow students in that major, or that emphasis, as a way of trying to draw out particular outcomes that might be unique to your circumstances. That said, many of the issues that we face are broad-based and would apply to any major, any school, or any college. And so we don't want to miss the forest for the trees.
Dr. Edwards, do you have any thoughts here?
Yeah, it's interesting because Ian gave a really appropriately political answer, and I because I only have a year left, so what the fuck do I care? I'll spill beans. There are different levels of autonomy that different units or schools have. So I guess for one thing, don't think that the people who are your faculty in whatever school you're in and the chair or program director of whatever school or program you're in have not already tried this, because ours did. Tried to just say, we'll all be remote. let's all be remote. We are all experts. I mean, we have DM, we have digital media, writing communication programs, like we all already teach hybrid anyway. He said, I'll just list everybody as remote. And the provost office did not like that. So there, one thing I think Ian points out that's very important is you can think about how to organize within these structures, but it's not going to be equitable across campus. Some schools and units are going to be able to get away with things that other schools and units aren't able to get away with, although I think we're all trying.
Thank you. So next question here. Any tips for students organizing in the face of the chance of administrative repression and surveillance, which the GT admin has a history of doing? I think this was actually something reported in local newspapers a few years back for one student activist, but does anybody here have thoughts?
For one, don't use Georgia Tech platforms to do it, because anything that gets sent over a Georgia Tech platform, like your email address, is subject to Freedom of Information Act requests. And yeah, it's just a bad idea to use any of that infrastructure to do organizing. So I'd advise against that.
There's a lot of really good information that many of our CS students will probably be really adept at implementing for like how to communicate securely via Signal and all of those things. I think you can never take your privacy too seriously, right? You should always be really concerned about your privacy. But then also, from my perspective, one of the things that's been important for me is to be a little bit fearless. And, you know, the point was made earlier, I'm sorry, I forgot who said it, that as students, you have quite a lot more power and leeway. No one can fire you from going to school. I mean, they can expel you if you do something that they deem really terrible, but like, don't kill anyone. But that is to say that there are moments where it is appropriate to throw open the doors and shine the spotlight on terrible behavior that's going on. And you can strategize on how to do that as safely as possible, right? But in some instances, yeah, they're going to surveil you. Like I know that they're looking very closely at what I do, right? HR, when I was in the New York Times, HR emailed me and they wanted to get me on the phone immediately to talk about my accommodation because I had been in the New York Times saying, you know, I'm disabled and I don't know that I'm going to be able to get this. So know that you're being watched and try to be a little bit fearless, but also appropriately cautious.
All right, anybody else want to jump in before we move into the next question?
I would like to add to that point, and sorry if there's any like noise or if my signal is getting messed up. There's like a storm going on here. But I wanted to just say that I really do appreciate the point that Dr. Edwards was just making about the notion of fearlessness, because, you know, just stepping into this role not too long ago, and seeing how things work with admin, there have been a number of folks who have approached me just since I, you know, started tweeting and saying like, what the heck is going on around here? Like, why do we not have a mask mandate, that sort of thing? And it can be intimidating, especially if you're someone who's like, why are these like people who are supposed to, you know, be protecting our entire campus community, like reaching out to me specifically, or, you know, that sort of thing. And I think that a lot of people who are involved in this work already know that there can be consequences, but you shouldn't necessarily be afraid of those, especially if what you're doing is for the right reasons and you believe in your heart that it's for the right reason. So I would just, you know, add that piece of encouragement as well.
Thanks. So Yanni has a question here. On a positive note, what inspiring actions have you seen from academic leaders, however you want to define that here at Tech or elsewhere, which give you hope for the coming year and the future of higher education?
Okay, I think I can make a comment on. It's a great question, and I'm appreciative to Yanni for encouraging us to look on the bright side, which is very much a Yanni thing to do for those of you who might know him. I've talked to a lot of folks all around campus in positions of leadership, and cynically sometimes you look at the kind of progression of administrative roles at universities, which have proliferated over the years, and we've got vice provosts for everything and associate deans for this or that and all the rest of it. And it's one of the gripes that many of us faculty have had over the years about this corporatization process. We have these enormously top-heavy organizations for reasons that I'm not going to go into right now. Some good, but most not. But anyhow, there's been a kind of careerist mentality to that effort for some time, where you get the job that gets you the next job, and you're always kind of jockeying for position or for credentials or what have you, in order that you can get a better gig with a fancier title at a better institution, whatnot. And that's not going to change overnight. But I really have seen people kind of almost be like woken up in that mode and realize, okay, what am I doing? Is this what I want to be doing with my life? Are these the choices I want to be making on behalf of my constituents? And I think that, who knows, maybe that will last, maybe it won't. But I've been encouraged to see the kind of autopilot of the administrative apparatus become disengaged, and to see individuals, even if it doesn't look like they're doing things, and even if I desperately wish they would be visible doing more of it, some of them are moving from kind of apathy or assent to struggle, and some of them are moving from struggle to action. And I'm encouraged by that change, and I think and believe it will persist and improve. Maybe not in ways you'll see immediately, but improve the state of institutions like ours and the benefits that they provide to students like you.
Thanks. So I guess moving through this, since we are starting to get a little bit over time, Alexandra has this question. The pandemic has triggered a massive wave of union organization and political mobility in Australian higher education. What are the prospects for US universities in following their footsteps? So I think, Brett, I guess with a lot of your work in UCW, would you like to take that on?
Sure, yeah. So I'll just say that the U.S. university have already started to unionize quite a bit. So UCW-GA was founded just after the recession, it's not very old. And then our chapter here at GT was founded only a few years ago. So this didn't just start in the context of the pandemic. This has started, back, the Great Recession, kicked it off a little bit, provided a lot of momentum for organizing in higher ed, because many states were starting to defund higher ed, and that's what started happening in Georgia. So this has, caused people to kind of wake up and organize a little bit, and, recognize that if they want higher education in this country to be good, they have to fight for it. There are significant challenges here, for example, public universities their unions are not going to be recognized by the NLRB, and that means that they can't necessarily negotiate contracts with the university for its workers. So thinking long term, that might be something that we have to target for the long term, in terms of kind of growing a unionization movement here in the U.S. among public and private universities.
Yeah, I want to jump in on that as well. I'm a proud member of United Campus Workers of Georgia. One of the challenges we face, as Brett mentions, but is maybe worth saying a little bit more about, is in fact that there's an act here in Georgia, there's law that makes it illegal for public employees to collectively bargain. And one of the things that means, it means, can't negotiate for contracts, but what it really means, on the ground, is that me and Ian are not allowed to strike. And if we strike, any union we strike through will be sued. and we'll lose our jobs and face a whole host of other sort of legal consequences for things. So if you're sitting around wondering why we haven't like just declared a work stoppage in protest, that's why. And so those are some of the challenges that we face. That being said, it is not illegal to join a union in Georgia. And if you are a business worker of any kind, I do encourage you to join UCWGA. It's a great union. It's a lot of fun to have co-conspirators and collaborators you can work on chaotic projects with. But it's, I think, also important then to remember that there are ways of organizing, mobilizing, and getting activism going and coming together that are not necessarily labor focused, right? So it doesn't have to be union. We can take that model. We can take the idea of people sort of collectively banding together in majority numbers and taking action, direct action, right? And we've already seen, even though we can't strike, here in the state of Georgia, we've already seen that we can effectively mobilize for change. And so that's a really important thing to remember, even as we're keeping in mind the very real legal limitations to what we can do as union members.
All right, well, thank you all very much. This has been a great discussion. Unfortunately, we are at the end of the 90 minutes. So I guess wrapping things up, in light of that last question, I highly organize anybody here who currently does get a paycheck from Georgia Tech to reach out to UCW and consider joining. I will I'll post a link there, or Brett, I guess if you would like to post a link in the chat there. Also, I guess, again, thank you all for your time and effort spent joining this town hall. In addition, I guess a lot of students here at Georgia Tech have been organizing around these issues through YDSA GT, and we certainly, we have just started a campaign calling for a students and workers recovery that we'll be having our first meeting, I believe, this Sunday. So if anybody is interested in joining YDSA GT, I believe, I guess our host Cameron might be able to post a link for that. But again, thank you all for coming out to this town hall. Thank you very much to our panelists here for, I guess, taking your time and answering through a lot of these really excellent questions that people have brought up. So. Yeah, and
Nikhil, there was a, sorry, I don't want to.
Oh yeah, and hopefully we can potentially have more events like this in the future, where I guess we can inform the Georgia Tech community about ongoing issues. I know Kyle Smith, you mentioned civil rights being a very big issue that a lot of students are facing.
There was a question, Nikhil, if this will be posted, if the video for this will be posted anywhere.
Yeah, this is the call is being recorded, and probably will release some highlights over social media, assuming all of the panelists here are fine with that.
So don't get me in trouble now.
Absolutely. Thanks
I'm
for
just
having us.
kidding. I'm just kidding.
All right. Well, again, yeah, thank you all, and I guess have a good evening, and everybody stay safe, and do your best to social distance, and continue the fight forward.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks all.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Well.
Good night.